so we're going to do a deep dive into some contrasts here that are going to tell us a little bit about what citizenship in the kingdom of heaven looks like. Because what Jesus' ministry is here to do is introduce this thing he calls the kingdom of heaven and to inaugurate this thing called the kingdom of heaven. And guess what? He is the king of the kingdom of heaven. This is what Jesus' ministry is meant to point us toward, to tell us about, and to call us to respond to. All right, so let's look at one particular contrast, and that is true healing versus partial healing. So as I mentioned, Luke is setting a trap in this story for his readers. He deliberately holds back some of the details to make his point. He wants the reader's prejudices against Samaritans to be exposed. He doesn't want you to prejudge these characters. He wants them just to be 10 fellas. Now, the challenge for us here in 2022 is that we don't have the same prejudices that the original readers would have had. Because for most of us, if I say the word Samaritan, you probably think of a good person, right? Like there's the Good Samaritan clause, and when we think of someone who is a Samaritan, we think of like a person who's a good person, right? But that is not the association that the original readers would have come to. And another very quick little detail for us to pay attention to, it's weird that these men ask for mercy. It's a weird request. If you have leprosy, you're supposed to cry out, unclean, unclean, to anyone who is approaching you. You were supposed to do that because it's a communicable disease, and people with leprosy lived outside of community. And they were outside of community because that was for the protection of the broader society. And so you would say, unclean, unclean, so that someone approaching you would not get sick. Luke doesn't really make it clear what they are asking for. Are they asking for Jesus to notice their plight? Are they asking an authority figure to bear witness to the fact that they are ground up in a debilitating social order that made them to blame for their own condition? A social order that says they deserve everything that's happening to them because they're bad people. That's also another possibility when they say, have mercy on us, that they want Jesus to see what is happening. Humans rarely see the whole person. Social systems rarely see the whole person. They see physical characteristics. They see skin color. They see height and weight. They see your biological sex. They categorize you. They make assumptions about you. They sort you based on what they see. And human kingdoms rarely see the whole person, let alone address the needs of a whole person. And what we are seeing is Jesus is inaugurating a kingdom, beginning a kingdom that deals with a whole person. Another thing that Luke is pointing out here is that Jesus himself is the king of the oppressed. Jesus' responsiveness to these men and their initial responsiveness towards him tells us a lot about what kind of king Jesus is. Jesus calls his sheep and they respond to his voice. Lots of people ignore Jesus even though he speaks directly to them. Citizens of heaven, on the other hand, recognize and submit themselves to him. Now, sometimes the reason that people don't hear the voice of Jesus is because they don't want to. The social order that they are a part of works for them, and they really don't want it to change. So pay particular attention to who responds to Jesus and who sees Jesus at work. Pay attention. Pay attention. Because the point Luke is trying to make is that this isn't just a product of who Jesus is. It's also a product of where we find ourselves and where we are born, and then what we are willing to see. Jesus is healing indiscriminately, and he is including indiscriminately, and this is going to become a problem. So what we want to see here, what I want to point out to you, is the contrast between people's ability to see God at work and, for some of us, our inability to see God at work. And one thing to note here is the wideness of Jesus' grace. It should be noted that Jesus decided to heal all 10 men, regardless of whether they were willing to demonstrate gratitude or not. One of the scandalous things about the kingdom of heaven is its offer to everyone. There are no categories of people that are excluded from God's offer of healing. And yet we find stories like this throughout the Old and New Testaments, places where the power and goodness of God is recognized by outsiders who should have no business recognizing the power and goodness of God. And we see insiders, people you would think would know that God is at work, and they can't see it. And sometimes it's precisely because of your insider status that it makes it hard for you to see God at work. This is one of the contrasts that Jesus is presenting here, that Luke is outlining here. So there's a couple things I want us to pay attention to in this contrast. One is the question, who owns God? Who owns God? There is a sense in which religious systems eventually attempt to lay claim to owning God. Once people believe that they own God, something weird starts happening. God starts agreeing with them about everything. God starts agreeing with them about who's in and who's out. God knows who the good guys are and the bad guys are. And weirdly, it lines up exactly with what that community thinks is going on. But there is a tendency for insiders to begin to believe that they own God. And so we have to become vigilant, because what this story is doing is warning you, if you have insider status and God does a new thing, be careful. You might not see it when it's right in front of you. And you notice that these 10 men start their journey loving Jesus for what Jesus could do for them. But only one turns back to offer praise to God. And notice what that 10th man receives. He receives healing, yes, all of them did. But when he responds with thanksgiving. There's something that went into him and is now coming out of him. And he brings that back and he offers it to Jesus. And Jesus gives him a place at his feet. And then that man receives that place at Jesus' feet and responds with praise. And then Jesus offers him the chance to rise and go and live in faith. And that man heads out. And I assume that this mutuality continued through that man's life. So what I want to invite you into this morning is, do you hear God calling to you? Do you see the healing that's possible for you? Do you have something that you need to bring to Jesus this morning?